So we're going to talk about Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta.
Okay.
There is a Pali phrase, Sabbe Sankara Anicca,
Mm-hmm.
Sabbe Sankara Dukkha, and then Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. Now,
Right.
what we mean by that is that now we're making a distinction between Sankara and Dhamma. Sankara normally means a collection of things that have come together, bound together. You could even think of it at the deepest level would be uh, molecules, chemical bonds, and that they're constantly changing. But not only do the chemicals themselves not have a self, but if you break that apart down to the atomic level, that would be going from Sankara down to Dhamma. Still, there is no self there. This is an important quality that we're beginning to look at an intellectual level, is that there is no inherency inside of a collection of things. In other words, the properties of water are based upon the combination of hydrogen and oxygen. And when you have oxygen and hydrogen broken apart, the waterness is gone.
Right.
All right. The same thing is true with an automobile, but Melinda and Nagasena had the conversation in the following way with a chariot.
Right.
When he says, "Oh, King, let's take that chariot, if you don't mind, we're going to take it apart." And when we got the chariot completely apart, where is the chariotness? Where is the essence of chariot there? The answer
Right.
is there was no real essence of chariot there. The chariot became a concept based upon all the constituent factors that were put together. Not only that, but the idea now of let us moving from chariot to automobile, the kind of automobile that when you use that word as a concept, you think of a modern automobile, not the automobile of the 1890s.
Right.
Nor do you think about it as the automobile drawn by horses, and now it's a cart. Okay, so back in time, it goes back to being more simple concepts. But in all cases, even that horse-drawn cart, there's no cartness there, just like there is no automobileness there in a modern automobile. It's just a constituency of parts.
Right.
Now that we understand that that's true with an automobile or with even a chair, there's no real constituent components in a chair that make the chair a chair in the sense of chairness. There's just sticks of wood arranged in a certain way that can be utilized in a certain way. And this is giving us then the concept of chair. The same thing with laptop. There's really no laptop here. Not laptop in the sense of laptopness, because the computer, this laptop, can be taken down to its various component parts. You can take the keyboard off and the screen off and the hard drive and the processor and the memory and the Wi-Fi and the Ethernet and all of the various little components out of it and spread those around and say, where is the laptop? And there's no laptop there until you put all of those things back together, and then there is a laptop. But as soon as the laptop is broken, in the sense that, let us say that the processor gets water on it and the processor is poop, because the processor is not functioning, the laptop has no value. Therefore, we will call it a laptop, but we don't even think of it the same way as let me open my laptop, because that laptop is broken. We call it with the word laptop, but the whole concept of it being a laptop is now not there. Just like some ancestor that died in your lifetime, Now that you think about them, you don't think of Uncle Jim as Uncle Jim anymore. You think of something that's buried. He's changed. He's not the same, and therefore we use the term Uncle Jim, but you would not have the idea, let me go see Uncle Jim today, if he were still alive versus going to the cemetery. It's a completely different experience.
Right.
All right, so now we have to understand that even though the concept of what it is changes, our word for it doesn't.
Right.
So if the screen to the laptop is completely busted and that laptop is of no value anymore at all, still I'll call it a laptop. And because of that, I may even put it on a shelf rather than in the garbage.
Okay.
All right. But where was the laptop? The laptop was not in the physical, it was in the concept and
Right.
in the usability of the laptop. Just like the chariot, there is no chariot there anywhere except in the mind of the guy who's putting the chariot together. And then the people see that chariot and then they think of chariot. But if they saw the chariot completely taken apart and all of the wood pieces spread around the carpenter's shop, then they wouldn't think of it, there's a chariot here. They would just see all the lumber laying around.
Right.
Just like you would walk into a service center for a computer and you would see that, oh, they're putting things together. And only after it's come together is there a computer there.
Right.
Ah, the same thing is with you. You've got cells, you've got some blood, you've got some water, you've got some gray stuff. And it's the combination of that stuff that makes you you, not there's an inherent Darrell in there anywhere. Now, this is the intellectual part. Now, let's go back to that part about Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta. Not only in that phrase, but we can also see it built into the second noble truth, but most specifically in Paticca Samuppada, that the self is created and that the vehicle of the self then becomes a vehicle for suffering. In other words, anicca, dukkha is the normal method. But if there is no self there, then it goes from anicca not through dukkha, but anicca to anatta. It's almost like a Y or a fork in the road. And anicca comes up this way, and we can take it anatta, that's not me, or we can take it dukkha, which includes the self. You need a self in order to suffer.
Right.
So now let's talk about it in the sense of, instead of using the word self, let's use the word selfishness. That when we are selfish is when there is going to be suffering. If somebody comes to me and says, oh, I really need that, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to keep my dollar, I'm not going to give it to you, then not only am I causing that person suffering because they actually need that food, but I'm also creating suffering in myself by saying, oh, no, my dollar is more important to me than their welfare. And so this is how we create suffering. Now, here's another thing that's really, really important. It's got to do with translation. That the word anatta and atta do not translate well into no self and self.
Right.
That in fact, in the if we go, here's a really good example of exactly what I'm talking about. You know the name Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
Do you know what the word Mahatma means?
No, I do not.
Okay. Instead of Mahatma, it is actually Maha'ata.
Ah, great
Ma,
self.
the great, no. Atta in this case is not a great self, it's a great soul.
Ah, okay.
You see, reincarnation, or if you, let's not use the word rebirth yet. Let's use just the word reincarnation, and the karma machine that controls the reincarnation process. And then we can put a name on this and give it a persona and call it God. That the karma machine in Hinduism performs the function that God does, because God's the one who chooses what to happen to the soul after one dies. Except they not only did they give him the karma machine a name, but they limited that karma machine to just merely heaven and hell, to where the Hindus have got a whole bunch of places. They've got dozens of heavens. They've got animal worlds. They've got human worlds, all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the point that we're making here is in the translation into English from the Pali, this word atta and anatta were wrongly translated as self, when in fact it should have been translated as soul. All the Buddhists, if they would understand, oh, that means no soul, then we can get that. But if we combine the word self and soul, the self and soul then is actually going to be a soul, as opposed to if we had no concept of an afterlife, then we would not need a soul, or we would not need a self. So let's look at it from this position, that with the Christians, they are like the atheist, exactly, with only one small difference. Christians and atheists are very similar. And that is that the Christians think that the soul is going to survive death, and the atheists say, no, the soul is going to die when the body dies. Upon the breakup of the body, there will be the annihilation of the existing being.
Right.
That's what atheists believe. Upon the breakup of the body, there'll be the annihilation of an existing being. So in that regard, then, atheists would be considered annihilationists. But if that soul does survive death, then it's going to be not only able to survive this death, but it'll survive the next one. It survived the one before that. It's going to continue to surviving death, which means it's eternal now, or at least semi-eternal, which means maybe way off in the future it may no longer exist. But for now, it's a comfortable, we got 1 trillion years or so to play with. It's not completely eternal, but it's mostly that way. So we have these two systems of eternalism and annihilationism. These are the ways that people look at it. And then, in fact, I have seen Buddhists accuse Bhikkhu Buddhadasa of being an annihilationist without even understanding what the word annihilationism means. But the Buddha was very clear that he did not teach that upon the breakup of the body, the existing being would be annihilated. What he taught was suffering and no suffering.
Right.
Suffering and no suffering, which means that whatever it is that is the container, the holder, the keeper, and perhaps the source of suffering, if we can somehow modify that, then, like put a hole in it, then the suffering will leak right out. That we need a substantial self to contain the suffering. If there is no self, there's nothing to suffer.
Right.
Right. That's the thing that we're beginning to understand. So this idea then that the why, anicca, leads to dukkha when there is a soul there, but anicca goes to anatta and bypasses the dukkha, because there's no one there to be bothered with whatever changed. Now, the next thing is we have to understand that this word anicca is a very powerful word. Intellectually, we get it immediately. But what we don't understand is that it takes some changes in order to get our attention. An example of that is on I don't know what color floor that you have, but if you have a dark floor and there's, say, for instance, a tick that's on the floor, but that tick is not moving, you're unlikely to see that tick. But if on that dark floor, that dark tick is moving, there'll be enough gradations of color changes so that you can see that movement. That's important. In other words, it's movement that we see.
Okay.
It's Anicca that gets our attention. Something changed inside the mind. It's always about a cause and effect relationship, and generally the cause is a movement, and the effect is the detection of that movement.
Yeah, I can see this.
Okay, so Anicca means something moved. And so the question is, how do we detect it? Now let's go into meditation for a moment and talk about it from that perspective. That while the mind has wandered away, it's in movement. It wandered away, it's going off into thoughts that are inappropriate, unwholesome, unuseful. The question is, can we see that? Can we see this turmoil in the mind?
Right.
That's the question. If we can see it, then this is what we call sati, to wake up. It's also a quality of being able to experience the mind, which would be then step 9 of anapanasati. It would also be, in other words, this word sati works its way through everything around what the Buddha is teaching. It's part of the Eightfold Noble Path. It's part of anapanasati. It's part of satipatthana. Everything winds up being sati. That's also the way that I teach is that it is the most important skill to be developed, is that ability to wake up, to be able to see the anicca. That's the first thing that we have to do, is to wake up to see that things are in turmoil, things are missing, things are moving, things are doing. So we begin to wake up that way, just like that we could see a tick crawling across the dark floor. Or you could see even a spider mite, which is relatively white color, across the white floor. If that spider mite is just sitting still, you won't see it. But if it starts crawling, you can see it. That's an important quality now. So now that you know that you can see things because of the movement, we need to start understanding we can see the mind while it's moving. That's the anicca quality. So something is happening in the mind. The question is, can you see it? That's sati, to wake up to it. Once we do that, we can recognize that we don't have to be in that state. That's an important quality, to understand that just because I can see that the mind is wandering away, I don't have to leave it there. This is one's right view. The right view is I can come and make a change, a big change, out of the little changes of the mind being spinning in turmoil, and make a big change to change my attitude. Because normally when the mind is in turmoil, the attitude is not very good. It's normally a loser's attitude. It's normally a victim's attitude. And so we need to change our attitude about it. This is why we do, first off, step 10 of anapanasati is the gladdening of the mind. And we can gladden the mind by saying, aha, I can see the mind has wandered away. And so we say, aha, I caught you. Now we could come back to the breathing. The breathing is really, really the most important quality here. That's why they call it anapanasati. That's why breathing is step 1 and step 2. So this is something that we're going to practice with anapanasati, is to make sure that we're getting enough air. The human being in its normal state is not getting enough air. And because of that, the part of the brain that uses so much of that air, the frontal cortex, is being deprived, while the reptilian brain is the one that's in operation. And it's the one that shuts down the breathing. So now that we're waking up, now that we're alert, we'll say the first thing we're going to do is we're going to oxygenate the brain. We're going to oxygenate the body. We're going to take some deep breaths. Many different ways to do it. We can also pan. But in any case, we're going to get some oxygen. We're going to wake up that frontal cortex. We're going to get the body breathing. Every step of anapanasati is stated that whatever step it is, like with gladdening the mind, we train ourselves to gladden the mind while we're watching the breathing in and out. So we put not all, but we put a great deal of our awareness onto the breath to make sure that we're breathing, getting enough air. And we're going to now, with that state of, I can do this, I can win, I can be successful, I can practice anapanasati. This is giving us that winner's attitude. This is also what we would call rapture or pity. It's success. I can do this. Aha, I caught you again. And so with that breathing and with that new attitude, we can come now to a state of satisfaction. That satisfaction in the Pali is the word sukha. Now, in the Thai language, sukha is used exactly opposite to the word dukkha.
Right.
In fact, they use the word sukha dukha. Well, that's also true in the Pali. So if there is an opposite, then dukkha nirodha would be sukha. So dukkha sukha. If we can come out of our dukkha into a state of satisfaction, then we're no longer in a state of dissatisfaction.
Right.
That's one of the major problems with translations of English, is these words, for instance, like dukkha is translated as suffering. A much better definition would be dissatisfaction, because we can apply that then to what's the difference between dissatisfaction and satisfaction. Well, dissatisfaction is when you were letting the mind just spin on because you were looking for some sort of satisfaction with the mind rambling away. But now that we've intentionally brought ourselves to a state of satisfaction, we are now not in suffering. This is also referred to as first jhana. And it's got the jhana factors. Here's the jhana factors. One is no hindrances in the mind. Number 2, we've got piti in the sense of that winner's attitude. I can do this. We've got that satisfaction, that out breath that's a sigh. Remember that? The panda? That's satisfaction. We become satisfied. Once we're in that state, we're in the state of first jhana. By using the breath, we've gotten the mind fit for work. By throwing the hindrances out, we've gotten the mind fit for work. By bringing in, let us say, dopamine with the hit, the high of I can do this, the satisfaction, the success. The word success I'm looking at is dopamine. Aha, I got it. And then the next one is the serotonin, which comes in with satisfaction. And so this is the first jhana. It's got the mind fit for work, so that we can apply the mind and sustain the mind. We've got it free from hindrances, and we have the rapture and the pleasure born of that seclusion from the hindrances. This is first jhana. Now all we need to do is to stay in first jhana. How are we going to do that? We're going to stay in first jhana with this applied and sustained thought. The application of the thought was to get us in this state, and now we're going to sustain it. How are we going to sustain it? By not letting thoughts or feelings come in to rob us or take us out of this state.
Okay.
And if we do get out of that state, then that means that we brought some selfishness back in. But if we're completely satisfied, there is no self. Whenever you're in a state of complete satisfaction, then there is no self. But if there is dissatisfaction, that means that perhaps danger or whatever, but we have to do something because something is missing, something's wrong. I need to protect myself. This is the self-preservation instinct, that the self-preservation instinct temporarily, when we're in the state of sukha, is suspended. The primary job of the self-preservation instinct is to keep us alive.
Right, of course.
And its primary job then of keeping us alive is by making us afraid, to alert us to danger. So the most basic feeling that humans have is a feeling of fear. Out of that feeling of fear arises anger, greed, ill will. All of that stuff of the second noble truth arises out of fear, but the fear is almost always coming up ignorantly. We're not aware of fear coming up. But if we're in this state of sukha, in this first jhana, we're going to maintain that state, so we're not going to let any fear come up. And better still, when fear comes up, it may not drag us out of that state of satisfaction. In the sense of, oh, I see that fear, but I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to watch it. I'm just going to let it be there because I'm satisfied right now. Normally, when fear comes up, immediately dissatisfaction comes along with it. Oh, I've got to do something. Oh, this is dangerous. Exactly. So this is that place where the Buddha is talking about. So now let's talk about the distinction or the differences between what we would think of as the word self and the word soul, because they're not the same. The first thing that the Buddha was talking about is that there is no eternal soul, but that there is a self, but that self is very temporary. It does not last the full life the way that the atheist thinks so. That it arises and it passes away. It arises and then it passes away. So first off, we intellectually begin to see that, well, there is no soul. But eventually, with the practice of meditation, we begin to see when this self arises. It arises along with and through dissatisfaction.
Okay.
And that comes through clinging. Clinging to things. And there are four modes of clinging. One is to cling to the self, and that's the fear of the self-preservation instinct when we're feeling danger. All right. But the other instincts are not, let us say, so strong. They're like the helpers. So the primary instinct is self-preservation. Along with that are three others. And the three others instincts, together with this self-preservation instinct, is exactly the four modes of clinging, the underlying tendencies. Now, the self-preservation instinct closest one is what they call the procreation instinct. In other words, not only do our genes want to keep us alive, but our genes want to make sure that the genes stay alive, even alive longer than this particular copy of the genes. But there is more to it than that. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa actually talks about it in the word of materialism, and the Buddha talks about it in the sense of sensual desire.
Right.
But Westerners, being all associated with the Catholic Church and everything, we hear the word sensual and we immediately think of sexual.
Right.
We're not thinking about sexuality right now. We're thinking of the things that kind of lead to it. It's almost like let's dig down to sexuality by digging through materialism. Because almost all of our materialism has to do with getting a piece. Why do we dress the way that we do? If we're not interested in getting laid, then we dress differently than we're interested in getting laid. So it affects the way that we dress. It affects the way that we talk. It affects what car we buy. It affects what kind of house we live in. And all of this gets started when we're very young, and then we just get into the habits of it. But Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it in the sense, let's get out of this materialism. Let's find a way so that we can live simply. That I know that you've got a family there, I do too, and that I would say, based upon the way that I'm looking at it, that the simplicity is much easier in Thailand than it is in the West. It's very easy. It's much easier to live a very simple life here in Thailand. For instance, we have no electricity other than, let's say it like this, we do not have an electricity bill because the landlord does not want to put in meters. He just pays the bill for all 5, 6 houses. And so but he would not like it if we put in aircon.
Right.
He would want to start charging us for that.
Sure.
Because we have no aircon, his electric bill doesn't go up. He's fine with that. Without aircon, without heating, I could stay here on the porch. I've got a fan, and that's good enough. And we live a very simple life, a life that's very difficult to live in the West.
Right. Yeah.
But we can understand that if we drop below a certain level of material living, then there will be suffering.
Yes.
For instance, if you could not afford shoes, and every place you had to go barefoot, you wouldn't do so much walking now, would you?
No.
All right, so there's a certain basic level of poverty that we need to stay above. And that would be adequate clothing, adequate shelter, adequate food, and adequate medical attention. But as you know, and we've talked, there's a lot of people in the United States that are missing one or more of those things. And their life is suffering because they don't have adequate housing. They don't have adequate food. Many don't have adequate medical attention.
Absolutely.
But if you can bring it up to just that level, then we don't need any more than that. Adequate housing is adequate. More than that is expensive, an unnecessary expense. And that unnecessary expense requires unnecessary behavior, unnecessary activity, unnecessary jobs to do, unnecessary paychecks to pay. But if you could live very simply, then expenses can be kept low. And this is one of the qualities and you can see that the way that they live in the temple. The temple life is very, very simple. There's no place to go and there's nothing to do. I know that if it were a Christian temple, they would give you a whole lot of rules and regulations and rituals and prayer and do this and do that. And they keep the monks occupied because they've got the idea that an idle mind is a devil's workshop. But
Right.
within Buddhism, it says, no, you want an idle mind. We don't care if it's the devil's workshop at all. If it's really idle, the workshop is empty. There's nothing happening in that workshop. You can call it the devil's workshop if you want to. So when I was in the monk in the United States, regularly people would ask, "Well, what do you do all day?" And my silly answer would be, "Well, I do lunch. I do lunch. The rest of the time, I don't have anything to do because there's nothing to do except enjoy the Dhamma." So this is what we mean by that procreation instinct is actually materialism. We have to recognize whenever you go shopping, do you need this or not?
Right.
And since you're the shopper in the family, you can cut down. You can say, look how much money I saved. I don't even have to go to work because I saved all this money by not buying. I didn't go shopping. Isn't that marvelous? All right, so let's look at the other two. One of them is quite amazing. The other two are the nesting instinct and the territorial instinct. The nesting instinct gives us all of our rights, rules, rituals, the way to do things. It's our society. That you can see how monkeys would live in a nest or how dogs would live in a den in a pack. They've got a few basic rules. Us humans have a few basic rules, but our basic rules are like in the tens of thousands rather than 5 or 6.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. All of our rights, rules, rituals, behaviors, way things are supposed to be, comes out of our society, and we are instinctually attached to that. In other words, we are become attached to doing things a certain way. And what is that way? The way we were told to do it. So we adhere to these rituals. We adhere to these rites. For instance, when people come online, we almost always do a little ritual. The ritual we do online is the same ritual that people do when they meet each other out in the public. We say, how are you doing? The answer is fine, or whatever like that. That's a little ritual. And if we don't do that, everybody feels bad. We don't we don't just pop into a business. Well, actually, we can do it in a business. We don't pop in on a friend and start the business immediately. We have to go through a ritual of setting things up to set the atmosphere. This is an attachment that we have to that ritual living that is part of our nesting instinct. In other words, we have to arrange the nest before we can have a dialogue, even on the internet. But that's not a problem. The real problem is when we become attached to those rites, rules, and rituals and the way things ought to be, especially if it's supported by other instincts. An example of that would be that because the concept of rebirth has been associated with Buddhism for more than 1,000 years, because the Buddha dealt with people who were Brahmins who believed in rebirth and reincarnation, rather. That means that you're going to find evidence of reincarnation in the suttas. And that one of the ways that the Buddha operated was with what we would call pacing and leading. Through NLP, they talk about pacing and leading in the sense of getting into the person's model and then leading them out of it.
Ah, okay.
All right. The way that the Buddha would do that would be to gain trust. So whenever people would come to him to ask him questions, that were outsiders, Brahmins, whatnot, he would teach them sila based upon what they believed. One sutta was when someone came to ask about puja at a death or a funeral. The Buddha worked it around to where this is not about that guy who is dead and what your puja today will do for him tomorrow. Your issue is, what kind of puja are we going to do for you when you die? The answer is, whatever puja we do is of no value. What really is of value is your behavior. Your behavior, your action in this life will have a whole lot more to do to determine what happens after your funeral than the puja that they do at the funeral. You know what puja is? That's the word for ceremony. Right. Yeah, all of the chanting and stuff that would happen at a funeral. So this is the way that the Buddha taught. He taught sila. But there are suttas where the Buddha was very hard on monks when they would continue to believe in those things. An excellent one is Sutta number 38, when the Buddha is really hard on Sati, son of a fisherman, who was saying that, oh, it is consciousness that roams from life to life.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the Buddha taught that consciousness is temporary. It too is anicca. Sometimes there's consciousness, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you're asleep, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're really on top of things, and sometimes the mind is just wandering away in a sleepy state, daydreaming or whatever. So there's no consciousness in some cases, and there's very little or lacking consciousness up to a level that would be useful. This is why Freud talked about subconscious and unconscious. Because there are things that are happening subconscious. What does that mean? It means they're happening consciously, but we're not paying any attention to it.
Okay, but it always seemed more like that was pointing more towards something that was below the threshold of consciousness or awareness.
Yes, are you going to be able to manage your threshold or not?
Interesting question.
Yes, that's what sati is all about, is manipulating that threshold.
Ah, okay.
To manipulate that threshold so that we bring it down to a level so that we can see what's going on. Here's an example of that would be anxiety. Clearly, anxiety comes from fear.
Right.
When people have anxiety, the answer to that is, oh, I need to do something because something needs to be done to get me out of this state of anxiety. So the story that I would use is, imagine that the old man was in an old hovel in the old times, and he's laying there in bed and he's feeling anxiety, and the thought comes, oh, I feel this way because it's dangerous and I've got to go do something about it. So he goes and he spends part of the night rebuilding the wall so that the goats can't get out and the wolves can't get in. After he's gotten the wall, he comes back in, he gets back in his bed, and 5 minutes later, he's got the anxiety back again. The wall and the fixing of the wall did not fix his anxiety. The broken wall did not cause his anxiety. All right? But many people have anxiety and they don't know it up to a deep level. And so they go about doing things just like this guy did. He knew about that anxiety, but he didn't know it deep enough to be able to deal with the anxiety directly. Well, we do that in many cases. Where are you going to get your happiness? Your happiness, they say, you have to buy our car. Some beer manufacturers will even say that happiness comes in our bottle of beer. Using words like gusto. You remember that commercial?
Yeah.
Okay. As if you can't have gusto without beer. So this is what we mean by that you humans have gotten the idea somehow or another, instead of dealing with our feelings directly, we deal with them indirectly. We deal with anxiety by going and getting a job. We deal with our greed for wanting to feel good by going and buying something. And so we get attached to the outside world, and this is that instinct of the nest. That's our nesting instinct. To be attached to this is the right way to do it. I got to go do it that way in order to feel good. If I don't do it that right way, then the people of the nest are going to throw me out, and my life will be crap. The next one is the territorial instinct. The territorial instinct is what really is the issue in the United States. Immigration.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blacks belong on the other side of the tracks. All right, all you liberal white Democrats, you can't come from California. We want to keep Texas pure. So you see, that's where that territorial idea comes from. But the way that we manage that territorial is through tribalism, through racism, through bigotry, and most often, I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so we attach to and become identified with organizations and concepts. And this is a great source of suffering. How is it so? Well, if you think of yourself as a Republican, every time the Republicans win, you feel good, but every time they lose, you feel bad.
Right.
Right. If you are a Democrat, then every time the Democrats happen something good, you feel good, but every time something bad happens, you feel bad. Well, very unlikely is it for both parties to have something happen where they both feel good. It's almost always the state that something happens and everybody feels bad because they're attached to either one side or the other. The ones who don't feel bad are the ones who do not see themselves as either Republicans or Democrats. And then you can really see what's going on.
Yes.
But so long as we identify with one side or the other, we're going to be missing stuff.
Excuse me.
So these are the four modes of clinging. These four modes of clinging all will lead to a self in the sense of selfishness. My group, my rules, my material possessions, and myself. These are the four modes of clinging. And they all have to do with a selfishness that has to do with suffering. Your job is to see that. Because you're looking back on the past and say, yeah, I've seen that in the before. I know what he's saying is correct. But now your job is to see that happening in the moment. Aha, I can see that right now. I'm waking up to it. I'm becoming conscious. I'm lowering that threshold so that I can see things that I used to have as unconscious or subconscious that I couldn't see before. Now I can see them. And when I'm using the word now I can see them, this kind of an I is a rhetorical or a language I, because we could say it in passive voice in the sense of now this can be seen, because there's no I in there. There's no
Okay.
self.
Okay.
So aha, I see you can also be said, aha, there you are. And there's no self or sense of self that is there, especially when there's joy there. When there's joy, we can see it as a kind of self. But the self that we're working with in Buddhism is the self that is selfish, that is the vehicle for suffering. And that your job is to spend as much time as you can in the state of non-suffering, in the state of satisfaction, in the state of, oh, this will do. This is good. And so a lot of confusion is over this word self, but if we recognize, first off, soul is what the Buddha was talking about with anatta. Anatta means there is no permanent, everlasting soul. But with that issue that the existing being that dies or is annihilated at the breakup of the body, that being that the Buddha is talking about there, that is the self that is subject to suffering.
Okay.
Okay, a being is a permanent thing, or at least a little bit permanent. Me.
How so?
Well, if the atheist has the idea that I am me until I die, and after I die there's no more me, then the atheist has the idea that me that does exist is at least permanent enough to last a lifetime. It may not survive death, but so long as that being is there, in other words, the car is a car and being a car, so long as it's not being taken apart. Once it's dismantled, there's no more carness there.
Right. Okay.
But the real point is that there was no being there ever. With the breakup of the body just breaks up. And that means there's no more creation and dissolution of a temporary being. This is why we have to look at that word being very carefully. Because being indicates a long period of time. But selfishness is something that arises very quickly and, if we're lucky, passes away very quickly. But while we're selfish, there is going to be suffering. It's almost like that the self is created in order to deflect or become the vehicle or become the object of the suffering. In other words, if there is suffering, what is it or who is it that suffers?
So it almost seems like, well, you'd think from listening to people talk and reading what people have to say about it that people are usually describing it the other way around. That there's this self and then the suffering, but what you're saying is that there's a suffering that actually kind of sets up the self. It works the other way around.
Let us say that the self is created for the vehicle of the suffering. That I don't want to give you the idea that that suffering exists, and therefore a self is created to manage the suffering that already exists, rather that its suffering will not exist until the creation of the self in order to hold it. Let's go one step backwards into the clinging for a moment, because we have already talked about feeling in the sense of I like it, I don't like it, or I'm not sure whether I like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's many Buddhists will make a wrong translation from the kind of feeling that's neither pleasant nor painful. They'll change that into a feeling that is no feeling at all.
Right.
But a feeling that is neither pleasant nor painful is actually quite a difficult feeling to deal with, because we want to either like it or not like it. We do not like to be in that state of confusion.
Yeah, that uncertainty.
Right. Uncertainty and doubt. Confusion is a feeling. And that will lead us, if we do it with wisdom, we can change that confusion feeling into a happy desire to know, an investigation. But that takes an attitude change. Otherwise, that confusion is going to keep us in doubt, confused, not certain, not being able to do anything. But it's also a state that is suffering. It's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant feeling.
Right.
Now, the pleasant feeling, almost always, if it's a wise feeling, is good. We're going to work with those good feelings. We want to manufacture those good feelings. That good feeling is, in fact, sukha. But what people do with it is that they see something and they like what they see, and now they want it.
Right.
So it's not the liking it, it's the wanting. If I like it, I want it. If I want it, now I've got to have it. There's where the I comes in. Almost to the point, if there is clinging, there's got to be a clingor. The clingor is the arm, the clinging is with the hand. So you've got to have that clingor in order to do the clinging. Otherwise, there's no Klingon. So the clinging there is the clingor is actually the manufacturing of the suffering. All of this happens really fast.
Right.
It happens almost all at the same time, and yet people, they see when they look at the Paticca Samuppada in its great detail of this comes first, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, they have an idea that it may take weeks or at least days or maybe minutes to go from step to step, where in fact, oh no, it happens in a split second.
Exactly.
It all happens together. So the suffering arises with the self, and the self arises with the clinging. And the clinging arises because of the wanting, all based upon ignorant liking. But if we like it, now here's something. This is let us say a story about the Sangha, where Achan Cha and Achan Sumedho. This is before Achan Sumedho was an Achan, way back when he was still a kind of a student. And they were at a Katen ceremony. And the Katen is where, for some reason, I'm not going to give you all of the details. This is where all the young women will doll themselves up to go husband shopping.
I think I know this story.
Okay. And so Achan Cha nudges Sumedho and says, what do you think? And clearly Achan Sumedho had already been with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa by now, because he said this. He says, I like it, but I don't want it.
Yeah.
That's Paticca Samuppada. That is wisdom at that point of contact. I can see all these young women, but I don't want any of them.
Right.
So if we can come to the point of understanding that we like it, for instance, that showroom, that new car, that new Tesla, oh, it's such a beautiful car. Oh, I really like it, but I don't want it. I do not want that car. But I like it very much. Very nice car. We need to learn to start living our whole lives materially like that. Like we go to the to Tesco or to Walmart or wherever you're shopping, maybe Target, and you pick up something and you say, "Oh, I like it, but I'm not going to buy it," and I can put it back down. But see, normal people don't do that. They don't go through that sequence. They say, "I like it," and it goes right into the cart.
Right.
And so we start to making that decisional quality right when we go shopping. Every time that you go shopping, every time you pick something up, make that decision. Oh, I like this, but we don't need it. And so the life becomes less materialistic.
Well, and on the other side of that, there's also the I don't like it, because that's every bit as much of a problem. Learning to set, and probably a little bit more difficult to deal with, of I don't like it, I have to do something about it, and stopping
Right.
to get to the I have to do something about it.
But you don't. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that you've got to do something about it.
Exactly.
That's the wisdom. I don't like it, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Because if I try to do something about it, now comes the clinging, and now comes the selfishness, and now comes the suffering. But if you can catch that and say, I don't like it, and that's okay, then it doesn't lead to suffering. So this is the place where we recognize all this self that we're talking about is actually a very ephemeral, fleeting thing. It does exist. And when it does, it's going to be trouble. It is trouble. And so long as I'm satisfied, that selfishness doesn't occur. So if you got plenty of income and you're feeling quite satisfied with your income, then when your cousin comes to borrow $100, then you work it out and you give him the money. But if you feel like that your salary is not sufficient, that you don't have enough, then when the cousin comes to borrow money, you say, no, it's my money. There's the selfishness, and now everybody's suffering. Why? Because I did not feel satisfied that I had enough money. Well, you can take that in every direction. Every direction is always the same. If I can be in a state of satisfaction, then I'm quite willing to help people. But if I'm dissatisfied, if I'm unsatisfied, then I'm unlikely to help people. Because why? Because I want to help myself instead. Why? Because I'm already in a state of suffering. What suffering is that? I'm the victim. I need help. So when we get ourselves in a state of satisfaction, that's the third noble truth. That's freedom from suffering. Now, a lot of people who talk about the Dhamma, they don't pay any attention to that third noble truth as if it didn't exist. They gloss right over it. But I would highly recommend that you spend some time contemplating that third noble truth in the sense of, oh, yes, this is it. Yeah, I like this. Right. This is good. I'm satisfied with the way things are right now. I'm not in suffering. When you can
Okay.
get yourself into a state of satisfaction, then what else do you need?
Nothing.
By definition, you're satisfied. There
Yeah.
is nothing that you need. Okay, so now let's compare satisfaction with enlightenment.
Okay.
All right. If I am completely satisfied, then enlightenment becomes irrelevant. Why? Because if I'm completely satisfied, then I don't need that enlightenment, good old whatever it is. Not only that, but if someone is enlightened, but they're still dissatisfied, then what good is their enlightenment?
Absolutely. It's a very good question.
Exactly. So, what if once we become satisfied, we do not need labels like enlightenment. We don't need labels like arahat. We're completely satisfied with the way things are without labeling them with these highfalutin labels that so many of the people, the ones who fight over these labels are the ones who don't have them. They don't have that satisfaction. That's why they're arguing over what's enlightenment and what's arahat and what's this, that, and the other thing. But if they look at it from the perspective of, I am satisfied, this is a good moment. This is nice. I like this. So, does that answer your question about the self and selfishness? And what is anatta? Anicca, dukkha, anatta. or Anicca Atta Dukkha.
Yeah, almost completely. The only question mark left dangling around it is, I guess it's about this idea about getting it at something besides just an intellectual level.
Well, now that we've talked about it at an intellectual level. Your job is to go to do that inspection. And the way to do it would be at that point of contact for the feeling. In other words, when a feeling arises of liking, can you stop that feeling at liking, or do you have to let it go into grasping and clinging, or what they call craving? I want it, therefore I've got to have it.
Right. Okay.
And a good place for you to do that is at the grocery store.
Well, while there's still plenty of room for improvement when it comes to liking, the stickier one for me is the disliking. That's the one that slips under the radar far more than the liking.
Okay. Well, let's look at it in its worst form. In its worst form, the not liking is going to wind up in anger. Is that not true?
That's absolutely true.
Okay. So we need sort of a fire alarm or a real big danger sign. So as you progress, it will come more and more subtly. So that in the sense of you can see it earlier and earlier. What I'm really getting at is that Paticca Samuppada in the sutras, they talk about it in the forward and in the reverse order. Why do we do it in forward and in reverse order? The answer is that it can be understood intellectually best in the forward order, in the sense of this causes that, then that causes this next thing, and then that next thing causes that over there, and then that over there is caused by, okay, or winds up doing that. Okay, so that's the reason that we teach it in the forward order, but in experience, it's to be practiced in reverse order.
Really?
And the reason for that is because you start off slow, the mind is going to be at its rapid pace. The
Right.
Buddha talks about the mind is so fast, oh monks, I don't even have an analogy for how fast the mind is. All right. So, with the analogy of the mind being very fast and sati, it starts off slow but gains speed. That's why it winds up that we practice Paticca Samuppada in backwards order.
Okay.
And so it would be very late in the game then when you would wind up recognizing that you're angry. Then, in fact, you might even spend quite a lot of time in anger before you ever recognize it. So the first thing that we got to work on is how soon can you pick up on the anger?
Usually pretty quickly.
Okay. Once you pick up on it, the very first thing that you're going to do is shut your mouth.
Yes.
Do not say anything.
Right.
Stay with that anger, but breathe deeply into it. As if you can say, okay, I can find that anger. I can find it. It's in the top of the chest. It's in the shoulders. It's in the middle part of the chest. Maybe it's deep. I don't know where. But the point is that we're going to use breathing exercises with that anger to breathe into it, to look at it, to find out where it is, and to watch it kind of break up. You know, in normal society, anger has been an issue that people have to deal with on a regular basis. And so they have these techniques or ways of doing it. Like when somebody's angry, in Thailand, they have the word jayan, jayan. In English, they will say settle down or cool off or whatnot like that. But basically, what the friend will try to do is to grab the guy who's angry by the arm and pull him away from and get him out of the action. So that's one of the things you want to do for yourself is to move yourself. So if you're angry at someone in this room, the best thing to do is to shut your mouth or maybe just say, I'll be back in a minute, and then leave. Get out of the place. Take a hike. That in fact, that happens in a regular basis. The example is the husband and wife are fighting with each other, and then one of them will say something that they know that they've gone too far, and so they'll storm out, they'll slam the door, and they'll walk out because they know that if they stay there, it's going to get worse.
Right.
Okay? Well, you can do that too, except don't slam the door. Don't slam the door. Just take a hike. The next time, the next thing is people will say, oh, we'll take some deep breaths and count to 10. Well, that's exactly what you want to do is start taking some really deep breaths. That'll help clear out that anger. But above all, the very first thing that you need to do when you are angry and you know you are angry is to shut the mouth. To be quiet. That's and that can be hard. Especially if somebody is still jawboning in your ear. That's why you want to get that room out. You get out of the room. Take a hike. Go to the toilet. Take some deep breaths and get out of it. The next thing, once you get out of it, is to experience that anger. Really get in touch with it so that I know what that anger is so that the next time when it starts to come up, I can see it come up. That I don't have to get myself all worked up and into yelling, that I can start to see that anger and I can say, all right, anger, 5 seconds ahead. Let's start doing our deep breathing right now. And so we begin to walk backwards through that cycle so that eventually you'll get to the point of saying, oh, I don't like this, but I'm not going to get angry about it. And now you're making some really good gains to be able to see I don't like something. But eventually you'll come to the point of saying, wait a minute, the not liking is being flavored by something. Why did I not like this? The answer is because these are the sankharas from the old past that give us feelings. And that it's our own preliminary kind of feelings that give rise to the not liking rather than the situation itself.
Huh.
Now, here's how that happens. Throughout our whole life, we have been feeling. And we have been feeling according to the way that we were taught to feel. And we were told, and that we picked up feeling based upon the way that the other people feel. For an example is if a child has a tantrum, generally the parents get angry at the child and one of them wants to hit the child. Now the child has to deal both with their own tantrum and the fear of the anger of the parent. But they also are picking up that anger from the parent. Oh, this is how I'm supposed to behave when children have a tantrum. So fast forward 20 years or 25 years, and now their child is having a tantrum, and they behave how with that child with the very anger that their parents taught them.
Right, I see.
So we are taught how to be angry. And then we remember how to be angry. And now we're in the habit of being angry. So when X happens, the feeling of anger comes up, which then is fed into our perception of what's happening in the moment. giving us now a current feeling of not liking, which then will deteriorate into the habit of anger.
So our not liking is triggered by something external, but what's triggered is something that is conditioned from old past experience.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Okay.
And so when you get angry, you're just repeating an old feeling that you've had before.
So it's not even, and this may sound like this may be a poor choice of words, but it's we're not even really having our own anger. It's someone else's anger that's just been sort of transmitted and now carried on.
Exactly.
Huh.
That you learned it as a child and now you bring it up and you perpetuate it. And so you're going to begin to disrupt that.
Okay.
The first time you disrupt it is when you are angry. Later, you'll disrupt it when you're in the process of getting angry. Later, you'll get in the process, you'll catch it at the process of, I really want to fix this problem. And the only way I know how to fix it is by getting angry. Then down to the level of, oh, I don't like this based upon my own habits.
Right.
That it's really not this situation that's causing this not liking, it's that I'm in the habit of it.
Ah. Well, what's interesting is that a lot of this has already started to happen. A lot of the interruption of the process. What's particularly tricky is, and this is just how I describe it for myself. It's the only thing that I've been able to find that kind of makes any sense in terms of trying to explain it to someone else. Conversations I have with Susanna, for instance, I've expressed it as I can catch the things that are a little slower. It's those things that are really fast or really intense that I have a hard time catching. And so what this looks like outside to other people, well, even from my own point of view, the way it looks is that it's inconsistent. I can catch some of it. There's some of it that is too quick or too intense, and it slips right past.
Mm-hmm. But now that you know that, you're going to become determined. I'm going to catch that stuff even quicker. I'm going to be kind of on guard for that.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's been on the radar, but as of yet, I don't know that there's been any great success getting those faster or more intense ones. But I haven't given up on the idea.
Well, let's work with that situation of learning to be satisfied.
Okay.
Because if you can get yourself into a state of satisfaction, then that feeling in that state of satisfaction is going to be something that you will want to maintain. In other words, I like this state of satisfaction and I'm going to maintain this state of satisfaction, and I'm not going to let anger pull me out of my good state of satisfaction.
I see. Okay.
So this is why we develop that state of satisfaction. That's, by the way, step 6 of Anapanasati, of Sukha. Find a way to become satisfied with this moment. Rather than thinking about the past and thinking about the present or future, you come to this present moment with great satisfaction. I like being here now. And that's the habit to develop. So that when you get into that state of satisfaction and then somebody says something that would normally have gotten you angry, you can say, wait a minute, I don't want to get angry. Just because I don't like what she said doesn't mean that I've got to answer her.
Right. Okay. Hmm. Okay.
Yes. Find a way of getting into state of satisfaction. That's why we practice anapanasati, is to come to that state of satisfaction over and over and over and over again. Every time you take a breath, you should be taking that breath consciously with the intention of being satisfied with this present moment. So use that word satisfaction as your primary mantra or word to use or intention, is to just be satisfied with this present moment, like this minute.
Okay.
And then you'll be on guard to make sure that you maintain it, so that if somebody says something that would have normally ticked you off, you can say, wait a minute, I'd rather be very satisfied right now. And so that's how it's to be practiced.
Okay.
And so now you can also see that all of these various little steps of anapanasati and paticca samuppada actually do fit in together in the sense of, oh yes, I actually do see how the mind works. And begin to see exactly how the mind works is that the old stuff comes up and colors my perception in this moment, so that I'm going to feel a particular way now based upon habit rather than based upon what's actually happening right now.
Yeah, okay.
And that's wisdom at the point of contact. Is to say, I'm going to be satisfied with this moment. I am not going to be drug into dukkha. I'm going to stay in my state of sukha. I like these breaths. That shows insight. Got it.
And I'm reluctant to ask the question, but okay, I'll do it anyway. Over time, this business of being on guard and being able to maintain this sense of satisfaction becomes, I assume it becomes easier, it becomes more second nature?
Yes, and it will become easier and more second nature sooner if you keep adding your breath to it. Make sure you're taking enough air. If you're getting enough air, then you can get that frontal cortex working. If you can get that frontal cortex working, then sati will be there for you. But if you're all shut down and not breathing well, then that's when people get angry.
That explains some of the difficulties I've run into in terms of getting unstuck from, a negative state will come along, and I have not been able to understand why some of these states are so sticky. And
they get stuck because we're not breathing, and when we're not breathing, then we go even stucker and stucker into it.
Right, exactly. I see that in retrospect. So okay, that's been the missing element. That's the piece.
The very element that I harp on with my students. That's the one that they keep missing.
Well, now I know. Now next time I find that experience happening, I can work with it, because I know that, okay, one of the things that has to happen here is we've got to get the breath right. In fact, it's interesting, because I remember it brings to mind something I heard Tanisaro say a long time ago, talking about how when certain unpleasant states come along, the first thing that happens is it hijacks the breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's probably what he was trying to get across is, you've got to get the breathing right, which is what you're saying. So, okay. All right, that's really good to know.
I'm glad that I can get through. That's the hard part, is I can say this over and over again, but when the students really get it, it's the breath. The breath is the important one. which makes sati even more important, because if we don't remember to breathe, then we're not. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's really. I mean, that's like a real moment of the light coming on. You know.
excellent. That's what this practice is all about. That's why one-on-one talks are so valuable. Is because the
Absolutely.
students can get that insight that sitting in the back of a Dhamma hall you're not going to get. Even when the teacher is talking about the very thing that you should be inciting about, you miss.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Or in the case of probably more people than not is you're listening to recorded talks, and that's all fine and well, and that's good for what it is, but it's not.
But they can be very valuable on the
Oh yeah.
one-on-one, because the students will identify with the student that they're watching. And when they recognize, I've got exactly the same thing that this guy did, and he's getting an insight right now while he's listening to the Skype, maybe I should too. And I say, oh yeah, I can get that too.
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. I wouldn't mean to diminish the value of listening to these things. That's not the case at all.
But the
But
real value, the best value, is doing it one-on-one, so that I can watch you and listen to your question and keep pointing you back and pointing you back and do it. You got it now.
Okay, so that's been a real linchpin piece that I've been overlooking. So
Well, I do remember talking to you about it. I've even sent you movies about it.
oh, I don't doubt it, but for whatever reason,
That's the way humans are.
yeah,
That's just. I mean, if humans were really as good as humans thought they would be, we would already have been in doing interstellar transportation.
right.
We don't realize that we're only just a small step above apes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so don't give yourself a hard time about not getting it, because none of the students do. It took me a while too. Yeah, it's all about the breathing.
Well, it's easy to overlook. It's easy to minimize because it's so simple, and it's so close to us. Oh, it's just breathing. I do that every day.
Not enough.
Yeah, well, right.
All right. Well, we've been going at it for a while. Let's say this: if you've got any other questions, let's postpone them, and please come back. It's been a while since. I mean, it's been a really long while.
Yeah, well, and it's not for a lack of desire. It's been every time I think, okay, well, tonight's going to be the night, then I find myself buried under more stuff, and going back to school for the first time in 19, 20 years. It's kind of a relearning process, and so I've been having to learn how to do it all over again, and find myself making mistakes and mishandling things, and getting buried under mountains of work, and so
Learning happens through mistakes.
yeah, absolutely it
Number
does.
one. Number two, if you enjoy what you're doing, the learning process will be easier. If you ever tell yourself, "Oh, this is really hard and I really don't want to do it right now," recognize that you're creating that dukkha for yourself, that you're creating the loser's mentality. But if you could say, "Oh, this stuff is easy enough and I can do it,"
Right.
then that's the attitude to do your studies.
Well, and some of it's just really practical, simple stuff like staying on top of what needs to be done when it needs to be done, so that you don't get behind, and then you find yourself playing catch up. Which is
Yes,
the situation I've been in.
that's really true. Or the other game that I used to play when I was in school is that my job is to stay ahead of everybody else.
Oh, I'm not even worried about that.
Well, that was my thing.
Yeah, well, and that probably would have been mine 20, 25 years ago, but now it's just a case of doing what needs to be done and staying on top of it. So anyway, all that to say is there have been in the last 3 or 4 weeks or so times when I was okay. Tonight's the night. I'm gonna go ahead and call them, and then like that rolls around. The next thing you know, it's getting later and later. I'm still trying to take care of getting stuff finished for the following day or for coming later in the week. And okay, well,
then you can plan on getting stuff done early so you can call, and then we'll continue on. This is really important stuff for you.
Absolutely, I agree. So, well, it's learned a very hard lesson about letting things get away from me this last week, and know what needs to be done in order to avoid that in the future. So, all that to say is it will be easier to avoid this sort of thing as I go along. So it doesn't have to be extended periods in between.
Excellent. Well, rather than putting a particular date on it, let's just say that whatever it takes, you'll give me a call within the next week.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I can agree to that.
All right. Well, let's leave it at that then, and we'll see you then.
All right. Talk to you then.
Okay, bye-bye.